American hot cocoa kind of thing. It's got cinnamon and chile, and so she was eating, and she's like, I think this could be a cookie. And so she like develops, a cookie that had those kinds of flavors. And when you make it, it's a little bit weird because the batter is really wet. Like, even when I was scooping it out today, every time I make it, I think, this is never gonna work.
Like runny what?
It's running, like it holds its shape when you use a scoop, but kind of barely. And also, this was almost 20 years ago, and it uses an ingredient that I can barely find anymore, Nestle cinnamon chips, cinnamon baking chips. So instead for this one, I found a bar that had cinnamon, like a chocolate bar that had cinnamon, and unfortunately it also had little tiny chopped almonds in it, but I'm like, it's okay, we'll put a little bit of chopped almond in there.
I would love it.
But they're really
Are
good,
you
right?
at liberty to say whose chocolate bar it was?
I can't remember, but I bought it at Lund's,
Oh,
like
okay.
it was like Lindt or something
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that,
Something
And-
out of the grocery store.
Yeah, and then you scoop it out, and it's this very wet kind of loose dough, and then you take cinnamon and sugar and mix it together and just sprinkle a liberal amount of it on top. So yeah,
I would say this is like one of the longtime favorites from the book.
Yeah.
Is this in the book?
it's in the
Yeah,
book. Yeah,
yeah.
it's a drop cookie, and
Everything
it's
for
really
Dr.
early in
Yeah.
the book. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and what's kind of interesting too is just like the person who developed this cookie, there's been a fair number of people who have pulled things from restaurants or other kinds of flavors that they've seen elsewhere that they incorporated into a cookie, which has really been fun. And one of them came from an ice cream flavors with
Oh
Joanne.
yeah, Joanne Holtmeyer, who it turned out to be our most winningest contestant. She has six recipes in our book. She won once, and she was a finalist 5 times. She's awesome,
Yeah.
and she was obsessed with an ice cream flavor at Sebastian Joe's. She lives near Linden Hills, and she would go, and it was an occasional flavor. It wasn't like Pavarotti that's there all the time. And so she finally worked up the courage to ask the person, so what is in this? Why do I like it so much? And they said, well, it's our spumoni ice cream. It's like spumoni. It's got some nuts and some fruit in it. And so she jotted down exactly what it was, and she said, I'm going to turn this into a cookie. And so she turned it into a bar cookie, which was it wasn't our first bar cookie winner, but it was kind of wildly controversial anyway.
In part because it was a bar and you would think that bakers would be sort of neutral about things, but that's one thing they're not neutral about. And we got crazy calls from a lot of people saying, how dare you?
How dare a bar?
It's supposed to be a cookie contest, what are you doing?
Wow.
And, we like to remind them that it's our contest, our rules. And, yeah, it is a cookie.
Right, yeah. And
Well,
all
in
bars are
Texas, they
cookies.
call-
Yeah, right.
In Texas, they call cookies bars.
Bars, right, exactly.
Yeah.
The only thing that's a bar that isn't a cookie to me is a brownie. That's a brownie, and that's a bar. But then everything else basically is a cookie. But yeah, it was kind of crazy. We kind of made up the rules as we went along. The first year we did the contest, we didn't really know. I mean, our only goal was to.
It was to get through the season. I mean, to be perfectly
Well,
frank,
totally frank.
yeah, it was a one-time effort, and it was like, what are we gonna do one more time? Every year we would have to come up with some idea that we thought was original and generally wasn't.
Wasn't.
And,
There are no new ideas in food writing, just new
especially,
approaches.
yeah,
Right,
especially with cookies.
Yeah.
And in this case, it was, Rick had offered up an idea that, let's try a contest, and we thought, why not?
Why not?
You know?
And in the past, so this was maybe my 4th holiday at the paper,
Yeah.
and we had done some kind of Christmas cookie thing every year, and there are cookies up here, Kathy. So, we had done, like, the one year we commissioned an architect to design a gingerbread house for us, and using this, you could use the same panels to make 2 radically different designs. You could do a standard kind of,
Traditional house, and then also very, very modern
like,
house.
mid-century modern house.
Because we
Yeah.
wanted to put this, we actually hired an architect to do this. This
Yeah.
was like no small thing, and
Right.
the challenge was we had to have exactly the same pattern, because we didn't have that much space. Exactly the same pattern for 2 gingerbread houses that looked nothing alike.
Yeah. And you just assemble them differently. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that was one of the crazier things we
What
did.
year was that?
It was maybe 2000, maybe 1999, something like that. And then one year, I danced in the Nutcracker for a long time, and a new. Yay! I was in Snow or Flowers. I was like a waltzer in the first act.
Let's see,
Pardon?
see a little element of it.
Like sometime that summer, a really beautiful new illustrated book, a book of the Nutcracker came out, and we thought, let's do like a Nutcracker theme. So we came up with different cookies that had Nutcracker themes. It was not maybe, I mean, the illustrations were beautiful because we got to use the book's illustrations. One year we did the 12 Days of Christmas cookies, and we went to 12 pastry chefs and said, can you come up with 9 ladies dancing, a cookie themed on that, whatever. And that was really popular.
Yeah.
But by that time,
We were like running
we
out
were
of
running out
like
of like
songs.
holiday idea things, and so we came up
Yeah.
with this contest, and we thought, will anybody even send us a recipe? And I don't know, I think the first year maybe 300 people did. It was a lot. We were really, really happily surprised at the response.
And we thought, surely this is just, initially we thought we'd just do it one year and then we'll do something else, but it was so popular that first year, we thought, nah, the second year we'll try it one more time and then move on. Except that
all the people that last
we,
year.
we still got so many entries in it that we decided just to keep on going until the recipes ran out, until nobody sent us anything, which would be a good marker that we
Yeah.
crossed the line. And as it turns out, we just kept getting more entries and more enthusiasm, and people started getting together in groups they became competitive. They would get together in groups and try to develop recipes, and then they would, bake together. Some people would do it all year round. They would work to, come up with something. Sometimes people would send in half a dozen entries, so you knew that they were like more
We're super
serious.
into it.
Yeah, and so what we learned is that there's no such thing as running out of recipes, especially cookies.
Yeah. And it was really great because in the beginning, we had a lot of, the first couple of years, we did have some original recipes, but a lot of the stories and recipes that came in were like, my great-grandmother taught my grandmother, who taught my mother, who taught me how to make this cookie. We've been making this for, since time began, since we moved to Minnesota. And we really loved those stories. And, but at the same time, our goal for the contest was to give our readers recipes that maybe they'd never seen before. Everybody already had a recipe for snickerdoodles or for spritz or whatever. We wanted something new, and so in those earlier years we did get a lot of new, interesting recipes. But it really took off after maybe 3 or 4 years, where people started turning in these wildly creative recipes based on something that inspired them, or an ingredient, or something like that.
And in fact, what often happened is that they would tap into whatever trends there were in the rest of the cooking world, and so you saw people incorporating brown butter, different kinds of herbs that were kind of surprising in the cookies.
Espresso was really big
Espresso,
one year.
lots of different nuts.
Yeah.
We had some cornmeal, and then we had the year of kale, when kale was really big, and
Can't be a good
at
year.
first we just laughed at it and ignored it, and then we got like half a dozen recipes with it from different people, and we thought, well, maybe
Something's-
we're missing something.
Right.
Maybe this is like the best thing ever. So we gave it a shot, and it was not memorable.
Oh.
Or it was memorable. It was memorable, but not in a good way.
Not in a good
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
So if anybody here actually submitted a kale recipe, we apologize.
Yeah.
One year, after we've been doing this for a while, and we started developing a method for the way we ran the contest every year internally, different structures. And one year we thought, wouldn't it be really fun to have a videographer from the paper come and video, do a video thing of our judging, because we would select, we would get between 200 and 400 recipes. We would whittle them down to about between 20 and 30 that we wanted to actually taste, and then we would bake them all off, and we would have a big taste off, right, all at once, so we could compare and contrast. We had a videographer come one year, and they shot it. They made a rough cut for us, and we were like, we can never show this to anyone.
You get a bunch of critics all in the same room, and nobody's. We're funny to each other, but
Yeah.
nothing very nice is being said, you know? We just put it that way, and it was like, no, this cannot see the light of day, this is not going on YouTube.
You know, it's like we are counting on the benevolence of our readers to send us recipes, and here we
Yeah.
are ripping them to shreds. I mean, we were there to pick a winner, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, there was that. but-
There
Yeah.
was that, yeah, but,
So we never did another video again. At least, we did videos on how to make our winners, but
Yeah.
that was it.
yeah, that was the extent of that, so. You know, just to go back to, you know, some of the surprises that we had as this went along, and one of the things that really surprised us over the time, in addition to the ingredients, was just a sense that we kind of built this community that we never knew was out there, of people who didn't necessarily know each other, who just, you know, were serious bakers or were becoming serious bakers, perhaps, we like to think, influenced by the contest itself, and that they would get together with, you know, groups of other people, either to bake all the cookies. We would hear about that a lot.
Right.
You know, the weekend after it ran in the newspaper, people would sit down, or not sit down, they'd be standing up with their friends, making all 5 cookies, and, you know, comparing notes and sending us the, you know, critique of them. And again, I'll go back to the note that, you would think, again, that bakers are all friendly. I mean, it's, you know, kind of a nice thing to be doing, but when bakers come across something that doesn't meet their palate, they can be less friendly than you might think. Yeah.
And we really didn't have any idea. I mean, we knew, look, we published 10 or 12 recipes a week, 52 weeks a year. This was our thing. And so when the contest came out and we decided we were going to publish 5 recipes, basically because that's what we could fit on a double truck. So we were going to put 5. And that's kind of what we stuck with for 20 years. We ran a winner and 4 finalists. You would have thought that, you know, we did this every week. We did so we thought, how hard could this be? The contest was a lot of work. It was way more work than 5 recipes kind of called for.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it was really fun. Like, you know, I mean, we had great jobs. I mean, let's not sugarcoat it. We had great jobs. But this was a particularly fun thing for us to do. And it was like, and it became our holiday tradition at the paper. You know, and it became a holiday tradition in the community, and we had never thought that
No, I
would
never,
happen when
yeah,
we did it. You know?
never anticipated it, and also, it was just really nice that it was the newspaper that was generating this. I mean, at the end of the day, that's kind of what newspapers are supposed to do, bring people together, you know?
Right.
And, so that was really a great thing to see,
And we didn't really know, you know, going in, and for those first couple of years, are people really into this? I mean, we were getting recipes, but the first kind of indicator that we knew that a lot of people were baking these things, where we had a recipe that called for, was it the almond flour one first? So, and I have a great story about the almond flour one, that I'll tell you.
The almonds.
Or was it the almonds was the first
the
one?
almonds, yeah.
So this was, our first bar winner was this thing called almond triangles, and if you, they're like the best thing ever, right?
Yeah.
They require like 5 or 6 cups of sliced almonds and maybe 6 sticks of butter. I mean, like, why wouldn't they be delicious, right? And I think we put in the story because, you know, if you went to Lund's and bought that many, it would be like $30, $40 to buy that many nuts. But there's a place in St. Paul that's a wholesaler called We Are Nuts. And so we put that in the story saying, you know, if you want to save some money, you should go to this store. And so, you know, it came out on a Thursday. Lee and I had both baked them a number of times just to make sure that the recipe was right. So I didn't have any nuts, any almonds at home, and I was going to a party that weekend, and I thought, well, I can't show up at this party without that recipe that we just published in the paper. So I wanted to make them, so I went to We Are Nuts, and I walked in the door, and the place was mobbed. Everybody standing in line was holding like 2 large bags of sliced almonds, and I'm like, okay, there's something to this. And when I got up to the front, the very nice man, was handing out a copy of our recipe to every single person who had them, and he was saying, you gotta make this recipe. And you know, at the time I was pretending to be an anonymous restaurant critic, so I never really told people who I was. But I thought, you know, this is so sweet. I just want to say, and so I said, I just have to tell you, I wrote that story. And he just like lit up like a Christmas tree. And he said, excuse me, and he went, and he got his wife out of the back room, and he said, you gotta come and meet this guy. And he literally said to me, you are gonna put our kid through college on the sale from this one recipe. That's how many people were coming in and buying those nuts.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we knew at that point that we were onto something, that we could direct that many people to, you know, a single ingredient. And then, of course, we everything seemed to revolve around
Almonds,
almonds.
right?
But this had to do with almond flour.
So
And
then we had a
yeah.
recipe that called for a lot of almond flour, and then there are these amazing, they were called Italian almond cookies, and they're amazing. They're so good, right? And so that came out, and the same thing, I went out on a Saturday, because I thought, I'm going to a party, I gotta make these cookies. And I went to the co-op, they didn't have any. I went to Lund's, they didn't have any, I went to I couldn't buy, I went to like 8 stores, and I took a photo of like all the empty shelves, and no one had it, and I thought, okay, this is really something. And so then I called the largest food wholesaler in the state at the time, Super Value, managed to find a buyer of nut flours, and on the phone, and I said, this is why I'm calling, and he said, oh, that's the reason why we just ordered 50 pallets of almond flour for the Twin Cities, for that one recipe.
So it was wiped out
Yeah,
in the
wiped
entire
out.
Twin Cities
Yeah.
and presumably the rest of
Yeah.
Minnesota.
Yeah.
We'll just say that. Because who knows? But you know, at that point, it was like, you know, the light bulbs go on and it's like, wow, this has a
Wow.
much bigger impact than we ever imagined.
Yeah,
And so that was kind of a game changer for us.
yeah.
Where can we find that recipe?
It's in there.
It's in there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
We're not talking about anything that's not in the book,
Yeah.
so. You know. And, so part of the winning concept was we wanted to have a story with the recipe because we're writers and there's just something charming about knowing the history or some silly story or whatever. So actually, tell the story about the almond.
Oh, this was one
Flower
of my
guy.
favorite stories of all time related to the contest. The guy who entered it was a young man. He was studying in Italy on like his junior year in college, and he was at the University of Bologna. He started dating an Italian girl who, you know, her family lived, they got on a train for like an hour to visit her family every weekend. And one of the grandmothers made this almond cookie and she made it every week. And so they would have it with tea on their Sunday supper or something. And he was so sad when he had to leave, wanted to say goodbye to his Italian girlfriend, but he had to say goodbye to this grandmother's cookies. And so he kind of screwed up the courage to say, you know, would you be willing to share this recipe? And she just looked at him and said, no. This is our secret family recipe, you creepy little American who's breaking my granddaughter's heart. So he came back to the US, he worked at Lucia's, you know, right around the corner, he was a server there. And he spent about a year, he told me, trying to figure out how to make the recipe work, and then he got it to a formula where it worked, and then he started making it for everybody. And all of his friends, and one of his friends said, you need to enter the Star Tribune's cookie contest with this. And he did, and he won. So, yeah.
That's sweet.
Yeah, isn't that great? Yeah, yeah. And that is a great cookie.
Yeah, really super great cookie. Oh, so we have another story about one ingredient that didn't make the cut, and this is the pine story.
Oh, you should tell that story. That's a good one.
No, you can tell.
Okay, all right. So, you know, we got in a lot of, like, you know, people were very creative, and really the reason that we even have this book, it's based entirely upon the creativity and the ingenuity and the passion that people had for baking. Somebody submitted a recipe, I think they called it the Northwoods cookie, and it was flavored with pine needles. Like, you know, you chop pine needles very fine, the way you would, like, you know, with rosemary maybe, like that kind of thing. And so, maybe like 15 years into the contest, we turned to our newsroom colleagues and asked them, would you if you bake a recipe for us, you can be a part of the judging. So, you know, we made that trade-off, and so that's what, but for a lot of reasons, we stopped doing that, and we went to a culinary academy and asked the woman who ran the pastry program there, would she be interested in doing this as maybe a class project for her? So, and it turns out Amy Carter, the woman who ran this program, super into the contest. She was thrilled that we came to her and approached her, and so she's been doing it ever since. And so we got this recipe, and we thought, well, Amy's going to be really tickled by this recipe. And so we thought, I mean, I would have just gone out to my backyard and, you know, cut some needles out of it. Amy was like, well, we couldn't possibly do that. What if there was some insecticide sprayed on there? And, you know, we did it. It's like using like a tea. Anyway, she drove out to a state forest like 50 miles away and trimmed like, you know, a bough and brought it in. It's like, that's above and beyond. So dedicated. And of course we brought it in and it tasted like soap. It was awful.
And, you know, one of the criteria too with the recipes is that we would always choose things that where you had ingredients that you could find.
Yes.
You know, all over the state, because the paper goes grows all over the state, and so that was the one we wanted to try, but it was like, wow, how many people have pine trees in their backyard? We're not really sure this one's gonna work, but you never know, so.
It is the state tree, the Norway pine is the state tree,
Yeah.
so, yeah.
Yeah, so,
So we came up with this process. Here's how we did the contest. We would get these entries in. I think we had some kind of deadline, and then Lee and I would sit down. It was funny because when we started the contest, I would say 90% of the entries came in by mail,
yeah,
and then now it's probably when we finished the contest, 95% came in by email. So it was a nice different switch. But in the beginning, I loved getting letters from like really old people in little space, like my grandmother taught me this, I've been making this since 1931, those kind of stories, really sweet.
yeah.
But anyway, we would get these in and we would sort them, we would go through them, and we would kind of have a yes, a maybe, and a no. And the yeses were ones that we definitely wanted to try and bake. The maybes were, there was either a really interesting story that kind of compelled us, or maybe there was a really interesting ingredient that we wanted to test. A lot of years we would get, we would invariably like, well, we got some lard recipes, let's try the lard recipes.
We
And they never-
would give things a shot, knowing that things have been around for a long time. Maybe we don't know everything we think we know, but the lard ones were not good.
The baking ammonia ones were not
Yeah,
good.
we tried that one too,
Yeah,
because
there's a
we've never
reason-
tried that before.
Yeah, baking ammonia, it's a
Yeah.
very old, pre-shelf stable kinds of, some kind of ingredient.
Yeah.
It's like, there's a reason that people don't bake with us anymore, it's kind of gross.
Yes.
And then we would have a definite no's, and we both have very different, we have very similar
Well, they're
ideas,
similar,
yeah.
but,
But we have ideas about what cookies should be and shouldn't be. And some of my ideas are like, I think a cookie should be made with butter. It should not be made with shortening or oil or, I think it should just be that kind of very golden, wholesome, butter does such great things in the oven when it combines with other ingredients. And I don't think that cookies should have things like Captain Crunch or, instant vanilla pudding mix or.
Got a lot of
Yeah.
those.
And we got a lot of those.
But also with some cake mixes in
A
there,
lot of cake
instant
mixes,
cake mixes,
yeah.
it's like, wow,
Wow.
this is like,
Unsalted butter?
Unsalted butter, yeah. That's what most of our recipes are,
Yeah.
unsalted butter. And what kind of, well, Lee, for one, she has a thing about.
well, I'm an outlier when it comes to cookies, and, but you always need an outlier to keep things under control, and, I don't have a particularly sweet tooth. I don't like things that are like crazy sweet. I don't like meringue. I don't like ketchup. It's all too sweet for me. And, but I can also recognize a cookie that is gonna be popular, that is very sweet. It's not like I, don't appreciate that. It's just, that's not the first thing I would choose. So I tend to veer off into cookies that, are less sweet, and particularly ones that come right up close to being savory. Not
Yeah.
exactly savory, but kinda close. And we have a couple of cookies that, have blue cheese in them that are fabulous in the book. And,
Some herbs.
and
yeah.
some herbs, and you don't have to rot your teeth to to enjoy a cookie, I guess. And
But Lee, for example, hates cookies that have jellies or jams in them.
oh yeah,
Like,
no.
So those would come in,
Yeah.
and I would really have to convince her, well, let's at least bake it before you summarily reject it. Let's try
Yeah.
that. So we do actually have a couple of cookies in the book that do have jam or filling.
We do.
Against her better
I'm-
judgment, but yeah.
Well, no. I mean, I'm all for. I understand what popular tastes are.
Right.
So yeah, we have to do that. We have one cookie in there that uses an ingredient that we only use once because we really don't. I don't really like it. It's the candied maraschino
Oh.
cherries
Candied,
that
yeah.
are candid and colored, and
Yeah.
they're super sweet, and it actually is a really nice picture, and the cookie looks nice, but
Right, yeah. And
I never make that one.
And the thing is, I learned a lot about having a much more open mind as the years went on and the contest went on. Because I, of course, had in my mind very strict ideas about what cookies could be, and then I was challenged by some
Couple of them,
recipes
yeah.
that turned out to be really amazing, and I was like, and it kind of knocked me off my high horse. We had one that's a cookie that I bake all the time, almond palmiers that use a commercial puff pastry, and it really probably should have won that year, but I just said, we can't have a winner that uses Pepperidge Farm, and by the way, don't use Pepperidge Farm, use DeFore or some other butter, all butter product. I guess Trader Joe's makes an all butter product only during the holidays, and it's half the price of DeFore, which you can buy at Whole Foods or co-ops. Anyway, that one really kind of set me aside a little bit, and then we had the tragic recipe that is actually quite fabulous.
So again, as I said, we really pay attention to what people say about their stories and whatever. And so someone came in or sent in their recipe and said, she just wanted us to know that this is the trashiest recipe that she has ever made. And it was like, oh.
That kind of caught our attention.
Yeah.
Really trashy.
What on earth are you talking about here? And so we look at it a little more closely, and yeah, it totally was. It was totally processed foods all piled up. It was club crackers. It was butterscotch chips.
The worst ingredient on the baking shelf. Yeah.
Can't remember what else. You pile it up. It's not even baked. So this was like a philosophical issue for us. Can you have an unbaked product in a baking contest? Now that's pretty deep thought for a cookie contest.
And it was a bar.
And it was a bar on top of that, so it's like, ooh, it's like red flags all over. But we thought, it's trashy. Let's just give it a try. And it was like so darn fabulous.
And it's a play on the Kit Kat candy bar, and it actually has a lot of those qualities.
Yeah. And we served it to, we tested it out, we served it to our focus group, which is basically the people that we worked with. And it was like, they thought this was the best cookie ever as well.
Yeah. It's like, we can't have a no-bake recipe win a baking contest, but it could be a finalist.
Yeah.
So then we had this event, the paper had just left its longtime home in downtown Minneapolis and moved into a building that had a big atrium in the heart of downtown. And so that year, for the first time, they had a big cookie event. And they asked a bakery, or they commissioned a bakery to make 500 of each one of the winning cookies, and people could come and taste all of them. And so as part of that, you could taste all of them, and then you could go and do like a People's Choice Award. And the trashy no-bake thing was the hands-down winner of the People's Choice Award.
Yeah. So it's like,
It's in the book.
yeah, of course.
And it's really good. I mean,
Yeah.
What's it called?
it's called the Kit Kat
Kit
bar.
bar.
And that's what it's called.
Yeah. And it's like embarrassing to go to the store and buy club crackers. It's like, these really aren't for me. I'm making them for friends. So you learn, right? And she had a great story. It was her mother-in-law's recipe. They kind of made it together. They both were laughing while they were making it. Like, can you believe how bad this is going to be? And then how great it turned out to be. They just loved that.
So we learned a lot along the way, and realized that we weren't always the best judges. Just sort of, as we're looking things over, it's like, sometimes you just have to test things and see how they're going to taste.
And we learned also as we went along, again, that we learned that, people are making all of them for like a cookie exchange or something like that. And so we were selecting our 5 winners based, not only on how delicious they were, but also did they all look good together on a tray, So they all weren't sandwich cookies, they all weren't drop cookies, they all weren't, refrigerator cookies. There would be a mix. And then we also tried to have a mix of, is there a cookie that's really easy to make? Because we're a general audience newspaper, and we're trying to. So we have a huge spectrum of kind of readers who have different interest in cookies. Did we have an easy one? Did we have a kind of a challenging one that a really experienced baker might find, particularly intriguing? So did we have one that maybe kids would enjoy making? That kind of thing. We kept those kinds of criteria in mind. And then as we started doing it year after year, we also didn't want to repeat ourselves. So we knew we were building up an archive of cookies, and we didn't want to have like the same ones over and over. So that was another way that we kind of sorted through entries.
And over the years, then we heard from many people that kept all those newspaper sections, and the fire hazard in the corner of the kitchen, yes. So that's really kind of what got us thinking about putting things together in a book and having it readily available. And we did an earlier version at the 15-year mark, and which was the great and Minnesota Cookie Book, and the ultimate one here is our 20 years with the contest. And both of us left the paper a couple of years ago, and so we have passed along the reins of the contest to the staff now. And, but the first 20 are all in the book.
Yeah. It's kind of our way of saying goodbye to the contest.
Yeah, yeah, time to move on.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
What are you doing now then? And then the other question is you're in the Star Trip, did you have a special kitchen where you're doing all your baking?
Well, two things here.
Yeah.
But for everyone made them, we prepared the cookies really at home.
Yeah.
We initially had it, the initial evaluation of them took place in people's kitchens, and then, later on it was the pastry chef that would make them for us. And then Rick and I would make them and make them and make them, till you could make them with your eyes closed, basically, because we wanted to be sure that they worked and that the way we described it was, something that people could follow, that type of thing. And if we each have projects that we're working on, the book has been taking us a while. I'm working on some other book projects as well, and
Yeah, I mean, I'm
Yeah.
just happily enjoying my retirement. Is basically what I'm doing. And when we started it, the first year that we did it, so we're sitting in a conference room, like in August, right? You're talking about the holidays in August. That's how newspapers work. And so I pitched the idea of the contest, and we had several other colleagues who nodded their heads and said, "That's a really great idea, as long as you do it." So Lee and I kind of looked at each other like, "Okay, we'll do it." And so that first year, I thought, how hard can it be to bake 24 different kinds of cookies? So I did
In
all
one
the baking
weekend,
in one
in one
weekend.
weekend.
Like I'll bring them all in on
Yeah.
Monday. I'll bake over the weekend. We'll bring them. How hard can that be? It was a nightmare, and don't ever do that. So that's when I learned, like, how can we do this? When we did it the next year, it's like, how can it? So that's when we engaged our colleagues, and we did it for a long time. Up until, should I tell that story?
yeah, you can.
Okay.
She's not here.
She's not here. When we put this all, we had a lot of really colleagues who were really good
Yeah,
bakers.
yeah.
And provided some really good feedback for us. And a woman came up to me kind of sheepishly and said, I've been watching this for years from afar, and I've always wanted to do it, but I've never baked anything before, and, could I be a part of this? And we kind of thought, that's actually a really good kind of
Test it
recipe
out.
tester, because some of our readers have never baked. So we found the very easiest recipe that we wanted to try. We gave it to her. It was like a sugar cookie of some kind that had some twist to it. And so she brought it in on the appointed day, and she said, they had these little green flecks in them, and I didn't remember that from the recipe. And so she said, well, I didn't know what cream of tartar was, so I used tartar sauce instead. I'm like, okay, and that's, I just we have to find a different way to do
Yeah.
this.
We're done with this.
We're done with this stuff.
Yeah.
And I felt so bad for the person that submitted the recipe, because they were obviously not gonna be under consideration.
Yeah.
And so the great thing about using
Yeah.
a pastry chef and her crew was,
Yeah.
they would make all the doughs the night before we would show up. They'd bake them off that morning. So when we arrived, all 20 or 25 or 30 cookies were super fresh, baked by professionals, looked beautiful,
Yeah.
and we could really judge them based on their merits and not on the skill of the person who had baked them. So
Yeah, so that was, and it was a pretty quick turnover, because we would decide on the recipes on Friday. Deadline would be at noon. We'd figure out which recipes we wanted that afternoon, hand them out, or give them to the pastry people or whatever, and then on Monday or early next week, the following week, we would taste all these cookies.
Yeah. And it was great. And one of my favorite parts of the contest was, so after we selected, well, first we would have like 25 kinds of cookies, and that's when you learn that people will eat anything. Because we would take some cookies that frankly didn't turn out so well,
Yeah.
and bring them to the newsroom,
Yeah.
and they would be gone in like 5 minutes. There were
Yeah.
300 people like, oh my God, free cookies.
Free food.
Yeah, and it was like, wow, I can't believe you ate that. But one of my favorite parts was after then Lee and I would test the recipes quite a bit, and then Lee would turn them over to a food stylist, and she would make them so that we could photograph them. And I always loved it when they came in after, we had two women, first Carmen Bonilla, and then Lisa Golden Schroeder.
Yeah.
And it was almost like Christmas. We would open up these boxes, and they would be so beautiful, and I would just think, this is,
Yeah.
I learned so much from
Yeah.
just the way they turned in things and made them look so beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. that was really a cool
Little,
project.
you learn little food styling tricks to make things, you know, to make a plain cookie look prettier and more enticing.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
that was always fun.
And I became such a better baker by the contest, doing the contest. So I always thought I was a fairly decent baker. I'm not a Kathy Ryan level baker, but I'm like, you know, Kathy Ryan. Or her sister
Ryan.
Susan, maybe I should say.
Susan?
But I became a much better baker and it struck me years later when I was interviewing a local cookbook author, Sarah Kiefer, if you know, she's really, really great. And she had a new book out, and I said, what kind of advice do you give to people when they're starting out baking? And she said, the quality that a good baker has is patience and the ability to want to try things over and over. Because the more you do something, the more comfortable you become at it, and you become like, she has a recipe in her book. I took that advice, and she has a recipe for like chocolate sugar cookies. It's a very basic recipe. And during the pandemic, I baked them about 25 times, because it was like, I love those things. And I was start to tinker with them after I got confident making the recipe, and I feel like my tinkered version, which is actually in the book, is better than hers. Because like over time, I'm like, this might benefit from brown sugar maybe a little espresso powder, maybe a little more vanilla, maybe not a whole egg, maybe a yolk instead. That she told me that was like one of the best lessons I ever learned from the contest.
What's
Yeah,
it called?
definitely.
It's called, it's in the
chocolate
last chapter of the book,
sugar.
and I think it's just called Chocolate Sugar Cookies.
So the last chapter, we thought that, since this was kind of our conclusion to, with the contest, that people might like to know a little bit more about us and our fluky
Yeah.
baking preferences. And so we have some essays in there on things that have happened to us related to baking, and then some of our favorite family ones or friend ones. And that's where his particular cookie lands. And but these are really, really great ones. And I have a cookie in there. It's called Cinnamon Dreams or something like that. I was actually trying to make a applesauce cookie that my mother made when I was a kid. It was a nice soft cookie, and I thought, people don't eat things like that right now. I think they would like it. And so I was testing a bunch of recipes all at one time. I had everything laid out, and had to go to a photo studio once I was done. So I was kind of pressed for time. Made up the dough for this applesauce cookie, and I was thinking at the time, gee, it feels kind of like dry, and how can it be dry? It's an applesauce cookie. And anyways, got the cookies all set, put them in the oven, and then glanced over at the counter and realized that I forgot to put the applesauce in the applesauce cookies. And then I thought, well, I've just wasted all this time, I've just wasted all these ingredients, what should I do? And I thought, well, I'm gonna taste the cookie because it's gonna come out of the oven in a moment. And it was, because there was tons of cinnamon in it, it was actually pretty good. I brought it to the photo studio with Rick and our photographer Tom Wallace, asked them what they thought. They thought it was good, and I thought, wow. I tried my focus group with my neighbors who liked it, and they all complained that, it is a little tough though, kind of like a rock. And so I just reformulated it and came up with a new version of basically what I had started out with. And I like to use that as an example of how really nothing can go wrong with the cookie. First of all, you always have an audience for it, your neighbors, your office, your kids, and they'll eat anything. And it may not always turn out to be the way you expect it, but it's always edible, which you can't say about virtually any other kind of food. So
There are no mistakes when it
there's-
comes to cookies.
yeah,
right?
yeah, you can just
You always look
work.
down.
You can always work with it. You can crumble them up and use it on ice cream if you had to. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Open it up to questions.
yeah.
Yeah.
Anyone?
Anybody have a question? Yeah.
Okay, I think it was the year before last, the winning cookie was a sandwich cookie. And I was wondering if there was like rosemary on top or something, the inside was wonderful vanilla type.
Is that the lemon?
Oh, that's
Is it
probably the
lemon?
rosemary lemon
And it looked
cream.
like they were kind of square.
Well, one of the last cookies that we had when we were running the contest, we stopped, our last year was 2022. And it might have been in 2021 and 2022, a really great cookie, it's called a rosemary lemon cream. And they're little,
that was it.
and they're sandwich
I
cookies.
kept buying them at Lund's.
Oh, yeah,
Until they
Yeah.
quit selling them, it was so good. It's in here?
it's in
Yeah.
there, yeah.
Yay.
And, and I say this,
It's
but
worth
they're,
the price just for that.
they're really easy to make, like shockingly easy to make. I mean, you just make little cookies, you build a sandwich with them. It's a filling. The woman who put it together, her name is Cynthia Baxter, and she has a couple of recipes in the book. And the first time she had a recipe in the contest, you know, one of my favorite parts of the contest was I got to meet, 100 bakers, like interviewing them, and when I asked her, because I usually asked everybody, why did you enter the contest? She said something that really stuck with me, and it was that she loves contests, and she realized that you can't have a contest if people don't enter them. And so she was entering her recipes because she wanted to keep the contest going. She felt it was almost her responsibility to like introduce recipes into the contest. And I was like, yes. So I entered,
I think it's lemon
lemon
rosemary.
rosemary, yeah.
Thank you.
So in Cynthia's, in the spirit of Cynthia, I decided I would enter the contest this year. Because I don't work at the Star Tribune anymore. I would enter, and it's a really awesome cookie, and since I haven't heard from them, I'm thinking, I didn't make it to the finals.
Didn't make the cut.
I
Do you
didn't
have it
make
under
the
a
cut.
pen name?
Pardon?
Your name or a pen name?
I was gonna enter it, it's a long story, but I was gonna enter it, have my friend Michael enter it, and he was a little like, well, maybe I could do that. And then I realized he was an ex-priest, he was like the most honest person, I know, like I couldn't ask him to lie for me, like, it was terrible, so I was putting him in a terrible, so I entered it under my name and I said, look, and I put in my story that I don't work there anymore, and, this is a really good recipe, you should do it. So I think on the day of the contest comes out, I'll publish it on my Instagram.
Oh, there you go.
What, tell them about the
What does it
seasoning
cost?
treatment.
Oh, well, so I volunteered at a food shop a couple days a week, and we were unloading a truck, and you never really know what's gonna come in that day from Second Harvest Hardware. And we got, these small packages of dried mandarin oranges, like, just dried fruit, and we were unloading it, and Michael was saying, you should make a cookie with these, cause I'm always bringing cookies in for the volunteers to eat. And I said, maybe, actually, this would kind of be a good ingredient. So we had been talking about our annual trips to Mexico, he and I, while we were unloading this truck. And so I was like, well, maybe it could be a Mexican theme. And we had just unloaded a bunch of corn flour, so I was like, okay, maybe we'll put corn flour in. And then he chimed up and said, well, Mexico's the #1 producer of pecans. I'm like, okay, Rain Man. Thanks for that detail. So I decided, well, okay, so I'll take some like agave syrup and I'll candy pecans in agave syrup. And so I did that, chopped them up, I kind of macerated the dried oranges in some orange juice, put those together in a shortbread that I used corn flour with, and then I made an orange glaze that I used tahini, the Mexican spice thing, which is not terribly spicy, but it is very pretty. And I thought, so a total Mexican shortbread, right? And they didn't go for it. So, I mean, imagine that. But I mean, would you have picked me?
No, of
No,
course not.
well, I wouldn't pick me either. So, I'm not blaming our
Yeah.
ex-colleagues in
Yeah.
any way.
Yeah.
So are the recipes exactly how people submitted them, or is there a little editing involved?
There's a lot of
There's a lot of
editing
editing,
involved.
yeah.
So, because most people don't know how to write a recipe, and they leave things out, or, it doesn't seem very accurate, or we're making it, and
But did you edit any of the content or so?
we tried to be true to what they
What these
had.
was?
Yeah.
Every once in a while, when something didn't look as pretty as we really needed it,
Yeah.
we're visual,
Yeah.
it's like, okay, we need some sprinkles here,
Yeah.
even though the person
Yeah.
didn't have it. And what was interesting though is that when people would send it in, especially early on, it was just written out, and the winners would come to the event that we would have, they'd see the pictures in the paper, and they would come over and say, this does not look like the cookie that we wrote about at all. And it's like, we're just going by the way you described it.
Yeah.
And later on, at some point, we suggested to people, you might want to send a photo of what you're looking at.
Yeah.
And that didn't particularly help either, but.
But we also,
Yeah.
the Star Tribune had a very, I wouldn't say strict way of a recipe, but
Yeah.
like all of our recipes, we had a format that we followed. And so we would take their recipes, put them in our format, and then we would send them back to them and say,
Yeah.
look, this is what we wanna publish.
Yeah.
Is it true to what you would,
Yeah,
and,
right, yes.
and I would say
Yeah.
98% of the time, they were like, yeah, this is absolutely fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a couple of people were like, well, I wouldn't have done it that way, but I can see why you
Yeah.
did it that way, so.
Yeah, so that's also why some of the recipes are a little sweeter than they normally would be if I'd just been doing it on my own, so.
And do you think being in, the city where or in the state where we have a state fair and people are very
Yeah.
competitive with food contests and all
Yeah.
kinds of creative activities, did
Mhm.
that influence your idea of having the contest, or do you think that just was maybe a reason why you had such overwhelming response, or?
I would say that this, by and large, the state fair recipes are, the contest is really, really different, I
think
think,
it's very different than the state
it is,
fair, yeah.
you think of it as being the best baker. The emphasis is on sort of, the baking technique and the results, it's not on creativity, and.
At the state fair.
At the state
Yeah,
fair, at
yeah.
the state fair, we like to think of it, as ours as the creativity,
Right.
What grabs our interest.
And I judged the state fair, and
Yeah.
it's like, you get in 500 molasses crinkles, it's like, they're looking for something very specific. Are the wrinkles really wide? Is it perfectly round? Is it not
No.
brown on it?
Yeah.
Those kinds of things. We didn't care about that.
No.
Well, of course we cared, like, if it
And
looked
they're
at
not
it.
giving you a finished product,
Right,
they're giving you
right.
recipes.
Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
decided, and there were later, after we started our contest, several other newspapers around the country started contests too. Lee was involved in a group called the Association of Food Journalists for many years, and it was basically food editors from newspapers from around the country would get together. You'd have a conference every year. I imagine that's where that idea came out of, like you were talking to people, and the woman in Chicago that had a contest, she was talking to people. And a lot of contests, they require that you bake your cookies and bring it to the newspaper. And we decided we were not gonna do that for a couple of reasons. One, we felt it would limit the number of people who would enter the contest, because what if you lived in Alexandria or even in Elk River? Like, you're really gonna drive a bunch of cookies in downtown Minneapolis? No,
Yeah.
you're not gonna do that. And also we decided we were not gonna taste
No.
all those cookies from people's kitchens, like, who
You don't know
knows
where
what
they're
those
coming
kitchens
from.
are like?
Yeah, there you go. It's just like,
Yeah, my kitchen, by the way, is spotless.
It is, it really is.
Yeah.
So,
Speaking of the state fair, I don't know if you can say, but has Karen Koch ever entered?
yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Oh,
she's
yeah.
in the book,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's good.
And
Yeah.
her recipe in the books is really
Yeah.
great,
Good,
yeah, yeah.
awesome.
And
Yeah.
Did you get many repeats, like,
Yeah.
sometimes people like taking a recipe and, okay, I didn't win this year, I'm gonna try again, I'm gonna try again, I'm gonna try again, with the same recipe?
Oh, and I don't know that it was the
Okay.
same recipe, but we definitely had repeat people, yeah.
And we
But
did
not
have people who would say, like, I entered this and obviously didn't go anywhere, so I tweaked with it over the year, and now I'm resubmitting it with these different kinds of things, and that happened a few times. And there's probably 5 or 6 bakers in the book, which is, out of the 100 recipes that we got over 20 years, that where people submitted over and over. We had a guy named Lance Swanson who has 4 recipes in the book, and Joanne, who I mentioned earlier, she has 6. And there's maybe 2 or 3 others who have 2 or 3, so, yeah.
And some of the people that entered, a lot of them, they would, we sort of had a kind of an unspoken rule that they may have had like multiple ones that were really good, but you could only have,
Like
you
one
can only win
semifinalist.
once,
Yeah,
you can't
yeah.
win for
Yeah.
everything, so we would kind of pick what we needed on that platter,
Yeah.
Maybe we needed a chocolate one, maybe we needed, something else,
Yeah.
but, yeah.
We kind of decided that you could only be the #1 winner once. And it was really nice, because there were a couple of people who won,
Yeah.
who were so thrilled to win, and they were like, yeah, I'm never entering again, because I don't want to be that person who keeps going back, yeah.
And the other thing that just really amazed us is that this is a contest where, for all practical purposes, there's not much of an award.
Yeah.
$200 at a especially kitchen
Right.
store, and no one else got anything. And but the bakers that were entering the contest, I mean, this was the big prize. This was the bake-off prize,
Right.
And it was that sense of camaraderie of having your neighbors call and say, I saw you, that was your
Right.
recipe, and boy, that was it. And then, of course, they would always end up baking it for every family gathering for the next, 5 years, and
Right.
you'd see them later, and it's like, I don't make that cookie anymore.
And it was, that was another lesson that I learned over the years, was that, Lee and I were in the paper all the time. Like, that was just our job, that was a normal thing for us to be in the paper. But I learned that, when you win the cookie contest, everybody you ever knew in your entire life is gonna see you in the paper and be excited for you and happy for you, and it was like, and I loved that aspect of the
Yeah.
contest, like, we made stars of people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it's very, very sweet.
Yeah.
I remember, years ago, the Star Tribune did recipes, books,
Mhm.
little books.
The little
Right.
pamphlets that the
Yes.
Minneapolis Star did.
And I got my name in there.
Did
Oh,
you?
yeah, excellent,
Okay.
all right.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Right, it felt so special.
Absolutely,
And,
yeah.
Did you ever meet Marjorie Johnson, the wonderful
Of
lady?
course,
Oh, sure,
yes,
yeah.
many
I
times.
just love her so much.
And she never entered our contest.
She did.
No, she never did,
I mean,
yeah.
Cookies are not her thing, really.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
think she's more of a yeast bread, like she's
Yeah.
done cookies and things, so
Right.
but Karen is sort of like, cookie
Yeah.
queen and
Right.
that's
Is
her
Is Karen,
wheelhouse,
the,
so.
she, at the state fair?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
In the
absolutely,
honey,
yeah,
the
she
honey
won,
room or the spray?
what do they call it, prestigious the pantry award, I think
Mhm.
she got again this year, I think she's won it 5 times,
oh, yeah.
so, yeah.
I mean, I judged the state fair for the first time this year, since I didn't work at the paper anymore, they called me and said, hey, would you wanna do it?
You made another judging job.
Yeah, and it's like, and I have to say, I don't know that I would ever do it again, it was brutal. But my favorite part of it was in the beginning, when everybody was lined up outside the credit, bringing in their entries, and there were some, and people were so excited, that was fantastic. But there were some people who had like literally wagons, and they had their kids pulling another wagon, they were entering like 40, 50 things, I'm like, where did you, how do we, and it was raining, and it was like a terrible day for baked goods, cause it was really humid, and I just thought, how long have you been baking? Like, you know what I mean? Like, this
There's
is
some
amazing.
competitive people out
Yeah,
there,
yeah.
You have to say that your cookie contest was so important in my family, because it was when they would come out, I'd read all the recipes, my sister-in-laws would make one for the big dinner, so, very
Oh,
special,
that's awesome.
very special.
I
Very
love
nice,
that.
thank you, yes.
Like I said, it became our holiday tradition too, and we really began to really look forward to it every year as a marker in our year,
Yeah.
yeah.
Do you miss it?
No.
I had the best job in the paper without question,
Right.
Sid Hartman probably would have thought that he had the best job, I had the best job in the paper, and I don't miss it one bit. I really enjoyed it, and I really loved it, but then it was like, I'm done, and now somebody else should do it, you know what I mean?
Do you miss tasting all the cookies and stuff? With the cookie contest, or is that, cause what I'm wondering is like, when you're tasting all these cookies, where's the point where your palate just has enough? Like, do you give yourself a break and then go, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You do take a little break,
Yeah.
we would always have, water and milk and, something to,
And do you swallow or not swallow?
Just take a bite, and
Yeah.
that's when you
Yeah.
knew, we would have maybe 6 other judges with us,
Mhm.
7, after the newsroom stopped participating, and you could tell when somebody really thought well of a cookie if they took 2 bites. At the end of it, I would always have a plate of half-eaten cookies, and I would always take a picture of it and put it on Twitter, hey, we have a contest coming. But
and it really was one bite,
Yeah. It's a
just
lot
so
of
you don't
sugar.
wear yourself out,
Right.
That's a lot.
yeah.
And a lot of it, it was self-sorting in a way too, cause we wanted the cookies to look good, so if they were not great-looking cookies, we were like, well, it's gotta be really fantastic then to taste, cause that was a great way to set those aside.
Yeah.
I actually helped bake the cookies this year and last year, cause Amy Carter, the woman the pastry chef, she's like, would you just come and help us bake? And I was like, well, yeah, I'll come and I'll make some dough. So, I kinda knew, I kinda know which cookies they selected. I can't say what, I'm sworn pain of death, but I can't say anything. And I don't know who won, but I made 5 of them, so, out of the 20, or 22 that they tested this year, so, yeah.
But just to repeat what Rick had said, that after 20 years, it just felt like, people have other ideas and if they wanna take it in another direction, that's good. So we don't want it, it's no fun to have something stale and you just sort of, you know, keep it going, so.
How many did you have the last year in 2022? How many submissions of the recipes did you
We
have?
had
We had
about,
a lot.
a lot, like 175, maybe
Okay.
200.
Okay.
And you know, the first year, the 2020, the year of the pandemic, we were really like, maybe there won't be any because of the
Yes,
pandemic.
that was
And we
the
had
hard
like
one.
350, like,
And we started worrying about it in like July or August, thinking that, you know, this is long before vaccines, everything's like terrible, you're not even in the same room as anyone, so how the heck are we gonna do this? And, in this case, we came up with a really fabulous solution, what we thought was fabulous. It was Rick's Garage. And instead of, and we all made, cookies, brought them in very carefully, everybody's masked up. It was,
all the doors and windows in our garage.
yes,
were
it was
open.
freezing, and we have some pictures of that. He cleaned out his garage, and there was like card tables everywhere, and people would go through one at a time and take, you know, one of each
All
of
the
these
judges
cookies,
would go and
yeah.
like make their own cookie tray.
There was like 6 of
Yeah.
us, and
Yeah.
then we raced home, and we had a Zoom tasting at home, and we would taste the cookies. I mean, it was exactly like we had done.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it was like, this is amazing. You know that you could do this. I mean, because the year before, nobody would have even known about Zoom, and you know.
Right.
But
And the crazy thing is,
yeah,
that was maybe the hardest year to pick a winner because they were so
They were-
good.
yeah.
Like, I mean, it was even hard just to whittle it down to, like, we're gonna bake 20, we baked maybe 25. We could have baked probably 50, they were all that good. Like, people had clearly, like, you know, this was their pandemic
Fun,
project, you know.
Yeah.
They were gonna do something,
Yeah.
you know, really dedicate themselves to it.
yeah.
So,
It would
that
have been,
year,
it would have been terrible if we didn't have it.
yeah, it
You
would
know,
have
it
been
would have
terrible,
been
yeah.
a great disappointment,
Yeah.
but
In
this,
light of it.
Right.
the Spumoni bars,
That was the
are
year
from
it
that
was-
year,
yeah.
but those were number 1, right?
Yeah, that was
I
the
think,
one.
yeah.
And we had
So, yeah.
another favorite cookie that came out of the year for me was a sandwich cookie, and it uses Biscoff, you know, butter spread.
This,
And one of my favorite things about when we would judge is I would take careful notes about what everybody said, even if we didn't. In the end, Lee and I didn't really care what people thought of the cookies. We
The-
were
the
gonna
other
pick the
judges,
winners, like,
yeah.
you know, the other judges, but we used them basically as a sounding boards to give
Yeah.
us, like, you know, what the judges said and give us commentary. And our colleague Sharon Jackson took one bite of this and she's like, I feel like I'm flying Delta right now. And then I was
Really?
taken by better as the best judge comment ever. Yeah.
And that's in there, cinnamon
Yeah.
butter cookies,
Yeah.
I think that's what it's called,
Yeah.
yeah. Really, really terrific with Biscoff, so.
Yeah.
Any other questions, or?
I know I was quite tardy, and
No, it's
be
okay.
very careful when you leave, is all I'm gonna say. You may have shared this earlier, but wondering of spice or things, your favorite flavors, or the things that you would come back to? A thing that it's like,
For cookies?
for a cookie, yeah, sort of your quintessential.
Something that the contest brought out for me that I never would have thought of before is I really love cranberries, and cookies, we've got a bunch of them. And it just never would have crossed my mind, and, I was trying to figure out why it was that I like it so much, and I think it's, for me, it's kind of the opposite of sweetness. It's just got that super tart flavor, and I'm, you know, I can go for that tart flavor, so, yeah.
Yeah.
Because of the holidays, for some reason I've always associated almond, the flavor of almond with holidays, and I'm not really sure why. And so I kind of gravitate to that, and also because I'm Scandinavian by origin, I really love the flavor of cardamom.
I was waiting, I was
Yeah.
like, please say cardamom.
But it's funny, somebody asked me, you know, like in my last year, it was like, what's the best way to win the contest? And I went back and looked, and frankly, 10 out of the 20 winners are chocolate.
Oh,
So
yeah.
like, you know,
Yeah.
yeah, and there were, most of them were early on, like, I don't think we've had a chocolate winner, and we haven't one in quite some time, but that was like, the weird thing about a contest is you can only pick what you've been given, right? So like, you have a pool for which you have to choose. So if it's a year where maybe like, it's not particularly inspiring, well, you still have to find a winner and 4 finalists out of that pool.
There were a few years where we
Yeah.
were sweating out
Yeah.
the judging part. It was like, cause we kept saying, no, this is terrible, this is terrible, this is terrible, it's like, whoa, we gotta find
Yeah,
good ones here.
like all of them are terrible,
Oh my
like,
gosh.
we gotta find some, let's go
Well,
back.
you
It's
just
like-
stay right, there's no blue ribbon winner
Right.
this year.
That's right.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, we couldn't just open up the paper and have 2 blank pages, we don't,
Yeah.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
they're all good in there,
yeah,
There you go.
yeah.
Make cards.
so, good,
There you
all
go.
right,
What do you think?
see
Yeah.
you back there?
Yeah, well, thank you for coming, and have another cookie, please.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.